where do you want to start?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we talked about this New Zealand business and the mass murder that happened there. Now, in my work, I tend to skip these tumultuous world problems in the last year or two. I don't follow those things, but this one caught my eye for some reason. I wrote about it because I think it sums up a few subjects we already talked about in this podcast. For instance, the subject of memes and the subjects of interaction of virtual reality and reality as it is. And I would say that it is entirely possible that in case of this Christchurch mass shooting, we have an instance of virtual reality bursting into reality in a quite violent way, obviously, and that the perpetrator was in fact motivated not by real, let's say, real problems of immigration, of clash of, let's say, clash of civilizations, clash of Islam, Muslim immigrants that are, as far as I know, a minuscule minority on New Zealand and in this, can I say, indigenous people, New Zealanders. I think that his image, I read his manifesto, and it is very interesting thing when observed from if you know something about this background on internet, so-called image boards. Those, I don't know, have you ever heard about image boards? You know what is it?
Like Chan, I have never been on them. I've never actually been on them. I have read Angela Nagel's book, so I have a reasonably good idea.
Yes. I think that Angela gave pretty good sum up of what the chants are. Truth be told, I read her book some 2 years ago, but I remember that I thought that it was very, very precise. Well, I not only browsed the chants, they posted my articles on chants a few times and commenting on them. Yeah. Because I wrote in a wake of Trump's election. They got into their heads that they elected Trump by meme magic. Long story short, I wrote something about that because I noticed that people on those chants display. They are very young people. They display a very peculiar mix of intelligence and complete insanity. And I wrote something about it, and they posted and commented and so on. But this guy had a background on chants, and he used a lot of in-jokes they used there. And his battle cry, if I may say, I may use that phrase, in starting this mass murder was, I'm kebab removalist. I'm gonna remove the kebab, and this is a meme that was created with the video filmed by Serbian, let's call them soldiers, in the occupied part of Croatia. Very probably they have a video from 1995 where they are singing with harmonica and trumpet and singing songs about kicking the Muslim and Croates and Serbian power and so on. And this song, it is hilarious if you know the language and if you know the context of that time. It's in fact funny. But people on internet, people that create memes, made thousands of variations of that little video clip and used it. The phrase "remove the kebab" apparently comes from the multiplayer games, strategy games, where people play. For instance, you have, I think it's called Total War, Crusader Kings. Those are strategy games where you do civilization building and conflicts, and a lot of people play against each other online. And remove the kebab apparently meant cleansing the Ottoman Empire from Europe in the context of playing the game. And my idea, this is not, I'm not concluding what I'm about to say only on this, but my idea is that the notion this Brenton Tarrant, guy who committed this mass murder, has of Muslims, has all the reality of video game screenplay. This is he was, I think, motivated completely by virtual system of understanding what Muslims are, what is happening in the world, and this idea of clash of civilizations. And his motivation was, I think, to sow chaos with no qualifications. And he says it in his manifesto that what is needed is to attack, let's say, both sides of the political spectrum. For instance, if you are anti-left, take posters demanding immigration, demanding clamp down on whites and so on, and paste them all across your street or something like that, so you can piss off people. And the idea is creating conflict without taking sides. That is, it is better to attack your own side, to put people in the situation that the only reaction can be violence. And I'm summing up a rather complex story that is a complex, I would say, mentality that lies behind this. But I think this sums it up. I think this has very little to do with what Islam is and what the problems between Muslims and Christians or Easterners and Europeans are.
Can we just come back in a few minutes to that question, the more deeper question of what's the difference between Muslims and Christians and Easterners and Europeans? But I just wanted to look at that issue that you've described, that from within the video world or from within the Chan world, that man developed his idea of what Muslim is. And this seems dreadful, but yet to a certain extent, I wonder if a lot of people, a lot of very ordinary people, aren't receiving their information about what is going on in the world from very mediated ways, very mediated methods, you know. I mean, for example, I have very little interaction here with immigrants because I live very rural. But when I do, when I go out into the town or whatever and meet somebody, I meet extremely nice people out with their families, very ordinary people, very, very endearing people. But yet, if one looks at media in any way, the stories that are presented can be very frightening in some ways, make one feel scared. And for example, if I see a video that shows cafes in a part of Paris where women are not allowed to enter because there are morality police on the street, for example, I mean, in one way, of course, that's been edited to make it look dreadful, but the fact is that the footage exists, so therefore there is the potential that in maybe in one or two places this is happening, and so it is frightening. Another thing that for me in particular as a woman is that if you hear a story of some mass rape, a gang rape, or if you hear a story of, for example, like the president of Finland came out recently and he said that due to the unearthing of child sex abuse rings in Finland that were being formed by immigrants, that he said that the country needs to have a serious conversation about what's going on here. So it's not like as if even in ordinary life for ordinary people there isn't some very strange perspectives.
There are a few things of note there. The media image, for instance, of what is called colloquially immigrant crisis of a few years ago, when you had supposed refugees from Syria. They were not from Syria, mainly people from the east trying to get en masse to Germany, through Serbia, Croatia, and so on. You had a conflicting message from the media. That's something I noted. On the one hand, you have this no holds barred accepting attitude. There is no absolutely. There must be no cultural. How would I put it? You have no right to make any judgments about those people coming in and so on. And at the same time, you have the image of terrorists constantly flashed in people's faces. That's something very interesting. This is conflicting message. It practically says, come accept masses of people. And in the end, they were not really masses. It's not. There are many people went into Europe this way, but not that many. Accept them with absolutely no pause. On the other hand, they tell you have to fear them. This is the kind of like I don't like this word. You can call it schizophrenic message. To this day, I wouldn't dare say was it on purpose? Was it really manipulating people, or was it simply from stupidity? Now, as for what you said about these problems, and problem is a light word to use in this context of these Muslim communities in Western Europe and what went down, for instance, in Britain in a city of Rotterdam, I think it's called, with grooming young girls, British girls, for sexual exploitation or whatnot. And the main problem is, in my opinion, that's a British society in this context went so out of common sense that police could not stop this. So they couldn't stop this because that would be not politically correct. But the problem then lies on the side, I think, of Europe and people, European governments, and most of all this superstructure of European Union that are based upon conscious destruction of indigenous cultures and historical continuity that creates separate peoples. I think that this is demonstrable policy that is not always functioning as well as those people would like it to function, but it is definitely a tendency. And in this vacuum, you have a lot of young people of different ancestry and different religion that then fill this vacuum in various ways. What we hear about in media are always, I think, the worst possible scenarios that play out. I don't think, I'm not sure, I'm not Western European, we don't have this problem. We are, for instance, I'm from Croatia, we are ethnically homogeneous. To say Croat and Catholic is still something that is convertible for most people. There is absolutely no difference. I mean, not that there is no difference, but this comes together. We are still this religion and this historical continuity is pretty much alive. So in that kind of society, this would probably play out different. But in societies that are in which continuity has been eroded for decades, as I understand, this is a huge problem. But Muslims are not the ones I would blame for it. I would blame those who not only maybe consciously create these politics, but the whole idea in the last, maybe from the 50s and 60s, of this liberal, no holds barred deconstruction, as they call it, of tradition. In the widest sense of the term, in the sense of continuing in time, generation after generation, continuing something, developing something, and not starting all over again with each generation, which is the idea now, not only with generation, but that every person can start all over again, reinvent him or herself. This is what is to blame. And as for Islam, I am not expert on Islam, but I know a thing or two, maybe because, among other things, Bosnians and Muslims, most of Bosnians, Bosnia is a country that has three ethnicities, and they were all called Bosnians at at one time. And sometimes when you meet them, if they are Serbs or Croats, they could say we are Bosnians also. That's very strange. But now the term Bosnian is Bosnjak is used only on for Muslim citizens. I cannot observe these people based on my life's history with some of them. I cannot look at them as some kind of aliens from outer space. I despise politics, for instance, of Bosnian Muslim leadership. I won't go into that, of course. This is a separate political subject. But I cannot observe those people like some kind of nomadic tribe or something, because they are not. They are Europeans, in fact. But in Bosnia, for instance, you have a problem of influx of these Wahhabi and Salafi radicals, partly because of the post-traumatic stress disorder on behalf of soldiers from the war, who were mostly secular people. And after the war, when this shell shock practically hits you, a lot of those people, some in Croatia, also Catholics, turned to faith in a most extreme puritanical way to kind of like reset their minds. I think that played a role in Bosnia, and in Bosnia one number of mujahedin came into country in the early 90s to fight Serbs and later Croats on Bosnian behalf, and some of them stayed living in Bosnia because they for their services they were given the citizenship. But I think that the numbers in Bosnia of such people are few hundreds, and I remember very well in Sarajevo, Bosnian capital, when some of the Wahhabists would show up in the street, he would get his ass kicked by other citizens that are Muslims also. Mm-hmm. And to this day, in my opinion, Bosnians don't buy into this, into this radical interpretation of Islam. Do you know what is Wahhabism?
Yeah, and I do. Yeah, I do know something about Wahhabism. It comes there from the Wahhabi sect that was in Saudi Arabia. I remember reading somewhere that a lot of people who were rendered quite poor, which may even be the case in Bosnia, received a lot of investment from Saudi Arabia into madrasa and organizations in perhaps places like Bosnia. But I wonder, is it possible? My first encounter with Islam was first in Turkey and then again later on in India. And on the absolute whole, the people were incredibly gentle and very accepting of all different types of belief systems. You know, there was no kind of idea that some sort of caliphate was going to be set up and that Sharia law was going to be the law of all lands. There was never any idea of that. It was a much more philosophical, you know, deeply kind of thought out types of conversation. But over the years, I do feel there has been some kind of new infiltration of perhaps Muslim spaces by teachers that are radical. In fact, actually, just to go back to the New Zealand massacre, there was something interesting I came across, which I haven't looked very deeply into it, but there was 2 New Zealand men, young men, native New Zealanders, who were killed in a drone attack in, I think it was Yemen in 2014. And at the time, the mother of one of the boys said that he had been radicalized in the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch by a visiting Indonesian preacher who was a radical. And then I thought, well, okay, I mean, people often say these kind of things. But then when I went to follow up the link to the article had been scrubbed, just very recently had been scrubbed from the internet, you know. So that's interesting in and of itself, that one is not allowed to imply even that perhaps there are radical teachers visiting these mosques, and perhaps there is also among people who feel maybe socially excluded in Europe that they will turn to a more radical form of Islam?
Well, as for that word radical, I don't really like it, because that would mean that consequent Islam is terrorist Islam. I'm not sure this is the case. Wahhabi idea that came out on Arab Peninsula with this radical teacher and his book of divine unity was in complete opposition of traditional religion. Now, just let me define traditional religion, and this applies to Christianity, to Islam, and Islam has a problem here because I think they have problems with developing their theology. But a tradition is a codification of teaching. That is, tradition is not traditionalist in a religious sense, is not a man who says you have a holy book and in this holy book are the answers and everything that is out of it is invalid. This is something that Protestants did in some sense, less radical than Wahhab. But this is what he did was to completely reject these schools of jurisprudence, Islamic traditional schools of jurisprudence that built these moral, political norms, religious practices, ways of life after a long period of hundreds of years, because this is how it works. That's how Christianity was built, of course, to much more perfection, but okay, we won't go into debate about what is true religion, what is not true religion, but there is a difference that we can ascertain between authentic religion and religion that is not religion, in fact. And this Wahhabism is, in my opinion, not a religion in true sense of the word, because they reject this. They reject images. The first thing they rejected that was most important for them at that time, if I remember correctly, was tombs, venerating the tombs of the saints. That was a practice by Muslims at that time in Middle East. And they laid waste to those tombs that pilgrims were, I think, visiting to pray and so on and so forth, because everything has to be, any kind of representation of the divine has to be destroyed. And this is, in my opinion, I'm simplifying, of course, but it is the tendency of this mentality is to completely simplify everything, to reduce everything to nothing, in fact. And this God of version of Islam is a pure nothingness. He is so transcendent that there is no way that you can relate to him. And this is a completely nihilistic mentality. And I'm not at all surprised that this kind of quasi-religion, in fact, gets so many converts in a postmodern world. This kind of mentality, I think, was inconceivable for medieval Muslim in Middle Ages, for Ottomans, for instance, for Turks that ruled the Balkan Peninsula for a long time. And I myself live at the border with Bosnia, and the city I was born was liberated from Turks in 1717. So they were very long time here. I myself use a lot of Turkish words when I speak. A lot of that stay. They were not very much loved, but they were not hated also. The people lived together. I find it very hard to explain this because it was so natural here. You can be in conflict with something. You don't agree. You know that you belong to different group. But there is no this idea that other man is some kind of alien from outer space. And I have a feeling that in the West now, the people are either completely rejecting that there is any difference between, say, Islam, Christianity, or whatnot, And on the other hand, that they are and simultaneously looking at those religions as something that is completely from the outer space, that is completely alien. I'll try to give you an example. I mean, I don't know how would I put it. For instance, I was working on archaeological dig last summer, digging out one fortress that was a Croatian early medieval fortress that Turks took, and it was the border fort between Turkey, part of Croatia that was in Turkish hands, and part of Croatia on the coast that was in Venetian hands. And there was one guy that came up to see what we are doing. And he told us a story. He read few letters exchanged between Hasan Aga Arapovic, that was a guy who was in charge of that fortress, and a Venetian captain from Omiš, the city on the coast. And what happened was that this Venetian guy had an affair with a gypsy woman that took some of his belonging after exploiting him sexually, and went on Turkish side. And now he writes to Hasan Aga. And the way he writes is, "Oh, my noble friend," and it is beautiful. With beautiful, those letters are epitome of politeness. "My good friend," and they're at war. "My good friend, this happened to me. You know how embarrassing this is. If only if you could find this woman and give me back my belongings." And now this guy answers, "Oh, noble Mr. So-and-so, Captain, how I agree with you. And surely I will do your bidding, we'll get your money, but there is a saying," and I cannot quote him exactly. He quotes something for Quran or something, or some saying of some wise man about if you trust the gypsy woman, this is what you'll get. It's very hard to translate in English, but in very beautiful words. He tells him, of course, he'll help him man to a man. He understands his plight, but he is also telling him that he is complete idiot in most polite kind of way. And this is the way how those people communicated. This Turkish commander was Bosnian or Croat Muslim, because in Ottoman Empire, this Osmanli, to be Ottoman, meant not racial distinction, but it was kind of caste, a social strata that was higher of these higher officials. And those people were extremely cultivated, and Ottomans could be very cruel. This empire tended to be extremely corrupted. It worked on the principle of omnipresent corruption, and it is still present in Balkans. That's something they left, I think, but that you could say probably for a Byzantine empire. What I'm telling you is those people are not aliens. The way they interacted, they talked to each other, was sometimes the Turks will impale somebody on the stake in Bosnia or Serbia, but sometimes those communications were very civilized, and some of those Turkish pashas, beys or agas were very much respected and even loved by their Christian subjects. That was it is something essentially different from what you see in media, from these things you described me just before. Because I think this kind of Muslim civilization would deal with that kind of fanatic and criminals very harshly. They would kill them because they were very, okay, I'm talking about Turks that were very kind of like warlike, nomadic people. They had very strict laws, and for some of those, misdemeanors, they'll just kill you without further ado. And I think they would do this for Wahhabis, and they defeated them in the, I think it was the end of the 18th century. Muhammad Ali, that was a Turkish general who have beaten these Saudi tribes of a Wahhabist religion, but as they could not, he was I think based in Cairo in Egypt, and this region of Arab Peninsula is too big to control. But I mean, he just left and they popped up again, because Wahhabi, I think, if I remember correctly, the first wars that Wahhabis waged were against Ottoman Empire. They had no contact with Christians, so other Muslims. This is very destructive mindset that tends to purify religion through reducing it to most atomic, simplest terms that has to be adhered to absolutely. And the first thing such people do is to try to purge their host religion, Islam itself. I think that was the case with them, and I think most. I'm not an expert. I mean, I know a thing or two about it, but I could be wrong in details here. But I think that most of Islam you see now in media, in the context of the terrorism and all kinds of misdemeanors in Western European cities, of no-go zones and so on. Has to do with this. This is not traditional religion. This is something that is quite modern, in my opinion, and as such, it obviously finds its place in the West, and very destructive one at that.
And you think, or perhaps you imply, that there is some particular circumstance in the West that allows it to exist?
Yes. Well, if West would have a spine, I mean, West is not a monolith that we can. I'm Westerner, I mean, but I'm less Westerner than you because I'm more to the east, obviously. But then culturally also we are very different. This Eastern and Southeastern Europe and Western Europe. But if you outright destroy your base tradition, this is what you get, because you get nihilism. I don't know, maybe people don't understand. People in countries like Ireland is now, unfortunately, I guess these last few decades in Ireland I encountered, they don't realize how what amount of desperation a religious man feels when he finds himself in such environment. And whereas Christian or Catholic is not somebody who will blow the world up because he feels like that, a Wahhabi would. And I think that this is why this form of, I would even call it nihilism, with Islamic guys, finds so many adherents, not only in people of Middle Eastern descent that are in the West. One friend of mine told me in Canada that he met a lot of people who converted in this insane form of Islam in a matter of 24 hours, in a matter of reading few texts, and just flipped completely, changed the religion. But on the other hand, the phenomena I saw through internet communication is that in the West you can meet people who change 4 to 5 religions until they are 50. They start off Protestants, they become Catholics, and then they pick some kind of most extreme Catholic conservatism. And then when they see that Pope will not listen to what they have to say, they switch to another Christian denomination, but then maybe Buddhism and so on. It is inconceivable to me that somebody can be like that. I never talked about these things before I started talking with people further west, because living in Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, such countries, you know who you are. Most of us, at least. So you have this. This is your religion is not result of your spiritual journey. It's your given. And you can spend a lot of time trying to run away from it, and most young people will do that, including me. But in the end, you see that you cannot escape it. This is as natural to you as your skin. And the very possibility that somebody can just leave this, kind of like strip himself of this, is in itself, I think, nihilistic. And this individualist approach to religion, that religion should give you something you seek, I don't really think this is the religious attitude of people that people had some 100 years ago. Not only in the West, but in the East too. You were more Far East than I. You were in Tibet and so on. Maybe you know better how things are there. But
no, I was in India, but yeah, I was just trying to think, because we have discussed this before, this idea that somebody can never strip themselves of who they are or what they were born into. And I suppose I find that a little bit confusing, because for certain and for sure I moved away from my natal religion, and that happened in spite of the fact that I was always very dedicated to it, and even still continue practices to this day, every day, that are part of that religion. But for some reason, something happened, some great schism happened, and within me, I can't speak for other people, but I remember that when I was about 15 or 16, I suddenly became aware that the community I lived in were not living according to the precepts of the religion that they were preaching, that they said that they belonged to. And I became extremely disillusioned by that. But then I went away, and very quickly into the mix, I began to explore Eastern religions. And for me in particular, it started off as Tibetan Buddhism, but I moved gradually more towards the old Vedic style. But I would say that what happened was that by the time I came back to Ireland, 5 or 6 or 7 years later, there had been such a meltdown in the church from the scandals with paedophilia and child abuse in the industrial schools and the abuse of women in the Magdalene laundries. And the anger was so strong that there didn't seem to be a church existing anymore. And the only people that were left to constitute a church were very drab and kind of boring, and they didn't offer very much in terms of attraction. But at the same time, I never developed what I witnessed happening then, almost like a tidal wave over the generation. My generation, I'm 50, 51. What I witnessed then was an absolute hatred build up in people towards Catholicism. Very good people would say the most atrocious things. And I remember thinking, well, I never felt that. I never ever felt that. But it still remains. Yeah. That feeling still remains. So if you ask, how can some people shed their religion? I can't say exactly why that happened, but I certainly witnessed it happening.
Yeah, but this is I think special case you are talking about. Really, I think Ireland is a unique case. You are talking about traumatic experience on mass scale. I was talking about people shopping for religions. This is what I meant. This is prevalent in the West. This is shopping for religions. So I remember I talk a lot with Mihai. For those who are listening to us, Mihai Marinescu, our third guy on Kali Tribune, is a Romanian and Orthodox. And Mihai was first to write about this. We both noticed this thing that you have people who go to great lengths in reading theological literature, for instance. I remember reading some of those Catholic traditionalists who are arguing for papal primacy and so on, and canon law. And you can't believe how those people, what amount of time and effort those people invest in this. I would never bother. I don't think I'm called to do something like that. That's something that traditionally high-level clerics did, and this is the job of high-level clerics in churches. But what is interesting, each one of those people is a recent convert to Catholicism from something else. So he's not the guy who can trace his family to hundreds of years of being belonging to this church. They just got into it, and after 2 years they are starting to reform it. This is a very destructive thing. And what you're talking about, Ireland, is different. I think Ireland is a strange country. I would have to spend a lot of time to try even begin figuring it out, and people are not very open about their deeper sentiments. Everybody is nice at the superficial level, but you don't know what is
That's because we're all so messed up. We have to hide it, keep a tight lid on it. Actually, funny enough, now that you're talking about the converts, I will say that I have seen something similar. And one of my earlier experiences, not my earliest experience, but when I came back to Ireland from Asia first, I would have spent time maybe amongst people who had Hare Krishna beliefs. And they would have been Westerners who had converted to Hare Krishna beliefs. And I was never drawn to becoming a Hare Krishna, but I did like their temples and I did like their food. But I didn't.
Yeah, they have good food.
Very good food, and I really liked their music. I like bhakti, I like bhajan, you know, the singing. I like choirs. I like anything. It's very uplifting. But the thing about the Irish Hare Krishnas or the European Hare Krishnas is that they always were so much more Indian than the Indians themselves, and so much more. They tried to reform Hinduism from when they would convert to being Vaishnavas, which is, followers of Krishna or Vishnu. They would try, and the Indians hated them. They loathed them, So I've heard of Hare Krishnas being thrown downstairs in India. So it just seems to be, maybe it's this incredibly individualistic characteristic of the Westerner to feel that we have discovered everything for the first time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we had a lot of Hare Krishna in the 90s here. I knew a lot of those guys. Yeah, they're converts to Hare Krishna. Yeah, they're funny. I always liked them because they were. It is a pretty dark, I think, organization at the core with that Prabhupada, that leader. But people, they tend to be funny. They're sometimes hilarious, especially Croat specimens. And they don't. Most of them would be in the movement for a year or two. Some of them were reconvalescing junkies because in this southern part of Croatia, in Split, that you have visited in the 80s. In the 90s, it was junkie central, and a lot of people, Hare Krishna was a way to kind of like reset their minds and so on. So, but I haven't seen Hare Krishna guy or girl for years. They are out of fashion now.
Well, I live beside the Hare Krishna island in Ireland. I live very close to it, and a lot of my neighbours are ex-Hare Krishnas. But funny enough, a lot of them have got into ayahuasca now. So they've moved after decades of being in Krishna consciousness to ayahuasca. So that's a change of religion there. You know, it's a fairly significant change of religion. Yeah, but very nice people.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. I rarely met a nice priest of any religion, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know.
The teaching matters. I mean, this is very hard to swallow because you judge people by their deeds. It is natural. If you have a sense of justice, you'll be pissed off at organized church. This is initial standpoint. But later on, you realize this is not how it works. I started talking about Islam, how Islam has this. I'm not expert on it, but I know that this is a system of what they focus on is jurisprudence. And this is Islamic tradition. Quran, the holy book, is a holy book. Same as in Christianity, Bible is holy scripture, is at the center. But in Christianity, you have church fathers. And these church fathers, last of them was John of Damascus, who was accidentally... He was a Syrian. He was an official on Muslim court, and he was the first to write about Islam, very scathingly. But he could write. Nobody killed him for this. I don't know, was it published at that time in that caliphate? And he had a degree of respect for them. He considered Islam to be Christian heresy, because Islam at that time, when he wrote, it was still not theologically formed as a tradition. They were just starting to build it. Christianity. He was the man who concluded what we call patristics, the age of the church fathers. These let's say original interprets of the Jesus revelation. So what I wanted to say, tradition is all that. It's not just a book. It's not just an idea. And one guy who figured this out, I think excellently, was René Guénon. He said it's not sentimentality. And this is very hard truth, a very bitter pill to swallow. When he says that the most important thing is what intellect can assimilate, what is given to your, I wouldn't say understanding in the way we conceive it now, but understanding with the whole of the being you are. And it is, morality is just a part of this. And okay, René Guénon is a kind of guy who pushes this in so far that I would beat him with a stick, because he would never, he would say, I don't know, Hindu religion is perfect, and then I don't know, Jacques Maritain, somebody told him that people are dying in the streets and passers-by are stepping over them. Is that normal? Oh, if that's not important, don't be sentimental. I mean, this means to go too far. But this is very important thing, and I think with this kind of Islam we were talking about, we are dealing with nihilistic, completely nihilistic thing. And to get back to this mass murderer, his understanding of Islam is video game understanding. This is internet. This is memetic understanding. This guy, I think, I could be wrong, but I think that this guy tried to realize an internet meme. The troll that went live. He stepped out from virtuality into reality. And this step meant killing a whole bunch of people. And with an idea to multiply violence. Because the idea is adversary principle, to create conflict, to always do actions that create further conflicts, with the idea that when conflict becomes total, the society he desires will emerge. And this society is, I think in the case of this guy, is something like Fourth Reich or something like that. This great European white empire. This is there is a background to this idea also in post World War II Nazis, that were working underground, Nazi intellectuals. You have it, traces of it, you have in Russian Alexander Dugin and people he is connected to. And these are, I think, extremely dangerous ideas. They are fringe, but never mind. They are fringe, but they are powerful. Their power is in being fringe. Because note that these chants are fringe subculture, fringe youth subculture, that all of a sudden in the last 2 or 3 years came in the center of attention and is obviously influencing the world. This guy was, I think, inspired by his internet browsing. He was not he was not oppressed by Muslims. He was not, he haven't had some member of his family killed in the name of Allah. He was playing computer games. He took a meme from computer multiplayer and made it live. I think this is, so I don't think this act of his relates to any real Islam, to any real problem. Real problems exist, but this problem he supposedly addressed is more like creating a problem, creating chaos, creating constant clash. I don't know. I myself have a real problem relating with this, with this kind of mentality. I don't know what's wrong with those people. I don't know how. I remember that my article they posted on Chance, and I was reading the comments, and I'm very sorry I never kept the image screenshot of those comments because they were so intelligent. They were very, very intelligent, but completely amoral. Yeah, there is no. I saw a few comments on this when a crime was perpetrated in Christchurch. They realized that this guy is one of them. Nobody, absolutely nobody, was not only condemning this, but they were cheering it because it's a game for them. They seem to be in this virtual world.
We can't understand it because we weren't weaned on computers. I mean, these kids from the age of 2 and 3 are attached onto a screen. You know, in actual fact, I was saying the other day, I was watching some videos of some small children on YouTube doing funny things. You know, the way, well, maybe men don't do it to cheer themselves up, but it can be amusing to watch children doing funny things. But one of the things I really hate to see is very, very small children, 1.5, 2, 3 years old, glancing to the camera to see how their activities are being virtualized, you know, their digital life. And so, to me, that would create a sort of a split in your personality where you can't actually feel like a human being. You are a product or a simulacrum of a human being. And if you take that further and further as they grow up, then if they're into video games, maybe some people do become to feel like they're not really a human being.
I do think this is the case. A lot of work I did on Kali Tribune was especially about this. It's posthumanism, because posthumanism is usually understood in a superficial way of this merging man with the machine. But I think posthumanism is more like a state of mind, you see. It's overcoming of human form. That is to say, stripping of human form. And the human form would be human nature. This is, even in Aristotelian terms, this is precisely how you say it. Form is what makes you real. Form is not visible form, but energy, activity that comprises some unique being. And I think posthumanism is erasure of this form, because this form gives you some properties, opens some possibilities for you, makes you what you are, but it already also contracts you. It limits you. You cannot be but human. Also, you cannot be but member of your family. You cannot choose your mother and father. You cannot be but member of the people you belong to. But now, the whole trajectory is to erase this. And now we mentioned the most extreme example with people becoming simulacrums, as you said, with that child. But the policy that negates any substantial value to ethnicity is doing the same thing on a grand scale with maybe less extreme, because it's not so individual. Everybody can say, you can say, maybe if you're in bad mood and say, well, I won't be Irish anymore, I'm a citizen of the world. Of course, you won't be able to escape what you are, but you can contemplate it. But if you say, well, I don't want to be human anymore, I'm gonna exchange my brain for top of the line PC processor, then you'll soon realize that you are talking impossibilities. But essentially, I think it's the same thing. It's the same process. And this process is what drives a lot of mainstream politics. I mean, sustainable development. I always never try repeating these two words. It's based, for instance, on this idea. Globalization, European Union with its ideology is this. And when you mix this kind of nihilistic self-denying, and you mix it with influx of people that don't want to have anything with it, but only want to come here to make money and remain what they are, because they don't have to adjust to any culture, because there is no more culture. Then you have a dynamite mix. I mean, you have a recipe for a disaster. So
you mentioned that earlier on about this idea that there was this erasure or erosion of characteristic. I think you mean national characteristic within the Eurozone or Europe. But I wondered at the time, like, where do you think this came from? I mean, is this something that had its roots in some pre-EU or pre-EEC idea?
Well, it was with us from I don't know, maybe for 100 or something years. I mean, modernity, nationalism is a modern ideology. Nationalism proper was born with the French Revolution. It is not. When you say, sometimes people consider nationalists to be backwards, but to want to get back to Middle Ages or something. No. The notion of anything resembling nationalism does not exist in the Middle Ages, and even later in the Renaissance. It's a modern thing, and nationalism was used. In the mid-19th century, I would say, to destroy these multinational, multi-ethnic empires, and this was finished with the destruction of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Croatia was part of it, and a lot of our history is formed by this. And other was the Russian Empire. And I wouldn't be trying to explain this in conspiratorial way, but there is a notable personage, for instance, Giuseppe Mazzini was an Italian professional revolutionary, and he was this nationalist revolutionary. He had an idea that we have to have a world of various nations that are built around ethnicities. First of all, Italian, because he was Italian, and unification of Italy was his life's work. And this is the idea that still hasn't gotten old. It is still here. At Mazzini's age, there were other revolutionary ideas. Obviously, Marxism. Marx knew Mazzini and hated him, but Marx hated more or less everybody. But he was always ridiculing Mazzini that nationalism is something that is obsolete, that will go away very soon. But as we see, communism is dead, the nationalism is still here. Now, the reason why I think is that nationalism, which is an ideology, that is to say artificial construct, is based on reality. It's based on ethnicity. And ethnicity obviously has reality. Now, this is reality which I, for instance, cannot explain. I cannot explain where ethnicity begins and where it ends. That is to say, I cannot really define it. But I saw with, for instance, the solution of Yugoslavia, anybody living here, fine, except one minority of self-deluded people on the left, so that these ethnicities are real, that you cannot dissolve them, that you have to understand them if you want to put different people to live together, for instance, in one federal state. You have to know a lot about them, and you have to treat them as they are. You cannot go on assumption that their ethnic properties and individualities will wither away with time. This does not happen. Ethnicity is something substantial. So what it is, how it came to pass, I'm not sure. I think it is based in religion mostly, because in times before, maybe before these ethnic states, or even the idea of ethnic state, you were defined by your religion, what religion you are and what region you live, for instance. So this was the way. You don't have a surname, you would have Deirdre of this and that part of Ireland or something like that. So I think it is a religious based. I think it cannot be erased, and this process of for instance, this European Union has an underlying idea that you should erase this. And this is a recipe for disaster. This is in Yugoslavia, communists tried something like that, and it played out terribly. So
why would people want to erase differences in ethnicity?
Because they don't want to be. I mean, they don't want people who are higher up want that. Most of the people are identifying with their ethnicity, obviously, but deep inside, you know, your ethnicity is one of those things that contract you. It limits you. It reminds you that you have some givens that you cannot change, that you don't have absolute freedom. And we, modern, postmodern, or whatever you want to call us people, have this strange idea in the back of our minds, and all of us, I think, in the West at least, that we can always start over, that we are completely unique snowflakes that can reinvent themselves, that have a freedom to be what they are, to be what they choose to be. And this is, I think, illusion. But this is the illusion that is very hard to shake, because it is very pleasant illusion. Although consequences of it are terrible, because this kind of freedom can only reduce you to nothing. I mean, this ideal of complete cosmopolitan that has no roots, that has no belonging, but he belongs only where he wants to belong. That's a man without properties. So man without qualities. That's kind of like a pure material individual unit, that atom that is bounced around the world. This is the end conclusion of such trajectory. So I think that's the reason why some people have this idea that they should lose their ethnicity. Surely in Ireland you have plenty of those. I met some.
I think maybe I'm not totally understanding. By ethnicity, like, you mean that Italians have a different ethnicity than Croatians?
Yes.
And that Irish have a different ethnicity than English? That's
yes,
what you mean?
Yes.
But the thing about that is that, say, for example, just to take Ireland for an example, we are made up of people who came from Scandinavia, from the UK, from France, from, you know, ultimately, you know, in our genes, we have Middle Eastern genes, we have Southern European genes. I mean, what ethnicity are we really?
I don't consider this to be biological concept.
Okay.
This is not material. Now I admit I don't have straight answer to this. I'm not sure. I only know I'm claiming its existence, not explaining its essence. This is philosophy talk now, so I can feel safe. But I cannot negate its existence, even in negative way. I saw it in a war in Yugoslavia when I was very young then, but now when I flip things over in my head, I see how that played out, and you see that those different peoples were really different, and that there was, of course, the matter of all those people having different conflicting national projects and try to act for 40 years like there are no projects, but they were there, and then when dictator died, it all went down. But I realized that this is existent, and one can discover this by observing oneself, the way you act, your mentality, the way the things that you accept and the things that you never can accept. I mean, I don't think that we people kind of like know ourselves initially. We discover ourselves. I think you would agree on that. That there are, when you're 20 years old, you don't know yourself so well as you are 40. But this means that at 20 there was something existent in you that you could not recognize or explicate. So to know something does not mean to make it real. It is reality is before knowing. And this is the thing with ethnicity. This is something that is very hard to define. The ethnicity means the people. I don't think it's a material thing. I think that it is a consequence, that it is the consequence of decisions that even in Europe, church or local churches made about some political and even theological matters in the very deep past of Middle Ages, and the peoples that were under their jurisdiction moved in that channel that was open to them, and had some kind of historical trajectory. This is what kind of like gives it a shape. A shape of people, of ethnicity, and so on. But the term is, I admit, very hard to define. I reject biological, and these alt-right guys and such racialists, they try to use this biological notion. It is false, because this comes from the idea that you can put people in a laboratory and define the ethnicity like you define animal species, and this is degrading of human beings.
Yeah, I suppose when you were speaking there, I can see how I have seen that in that I live along the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, and in the north we had such a prolonged civil war between what looked to the outsider like should be identical people, Protestants and Catholics, but there is quite a distinction which everybody recognizes, everybody knows that there's a difference. It doesn't mean that there's necessarily any, most ordinary people are absolutely fine with each other, but there is a difference between the Protestant Northerner and the Catholic Northerner, and perhaps that's coming from ethnicity. I don't know.
Ethnicity is just a word that sums up, in my opinion, a lot of things. I think religion is fundamental there, that religion is something more primary. It's historically earlier.
But then how would you explain there have been massive shifts over time? Say, for example, in prior ages where there was, say, a movement where Islam moved into Europe, for example, or there was a kind of a moving back and forth where people were converting from one to the other. I mean, that doesn't, how can that change people's fundamental properties?
I think it can, but conversions were not that usual thing. One mass conversion that happened to Islam was Bosnia, because rarely did conquered people in the Turkish times convert to Islam. Most of those in Balkans were Orthodox. In Bosnia, you had Croats who were Catholic, you had Serbs who were, you have Orthodox, not all of them were Serbs, and you had a huge number of population that overnight almost converted to Islam. And this is pretty unique thing. And the old explanation was they were Bogumili, that was Kristjani, that was Christian heresy originated from Bulgaria. Manichaean heresy, I don't know, have you ever heard about that? That believes in let's say, very simplified, in dual principle of good and evil as kind of like self-sufficient principles. And the idea was that they were suppressed by Hungarians who were Catholics and making crusades on them, and then on the other hand, Orthodox churches that were also prosecuting them with fire and sword, and that they just slipped into Islam because it was the most convenient thing. It's very hard. Those are things that you cannot really demonstrate in modern scientific methods, but it's a possibility. So. But people, I don't know, the way you frame this question, kind of like what was first, and I'm not sure how far we can go, how far our minds can go in the past to kind of like lay this all out in a straightforward answers. I don't think it's possible at all, because those are things, the existence, the human existence, is a very profound phenomenon. And now, this is a philosophical term, the existence. It is something that precedes human understanding, and this is something that humans discover in acts of reflection, not only individual reflection, but even scientific reflection, and there are even other kinds of reflections. And this is something that is, I think, cannot be really understood as a subject of natural sciences, so that you could have all the answers. I think you have to, in a sense, adhere to what you are. And I think that people have this kind of substance belonging to something bigger than they as individuals are. But in our day and age, they largely forgot about it. I will give you an example. This is very convoluted subject. But in war in Yugoslavia, there were cases when people, and not only this war, but in Second World War also, when everybody was killing everybody else, people who were considered as very good people became mass murderers, and their accounts as to why was that something awoke in them, that they, for instance, understood that people who were closest to them, people of other religion and other ethnic group, by closest, I think man and wife, are in fact enemies. And this is not some kind of psychopathic breakdown. No. These were mentally sane people, but ruthless, brutal, murderers. But before the war, they had no such murderous inclinations. I remember when one of my teachers was telling us this when I was in elementary school, even before the war, about this phenomena in Bosnia that happened in Second World War with some people that were known war criminals at that time, but before the war they were considered to be extremely tolerant, good people, and so on. And this is something in Balkans that you recognize, but none of us has a ready explanation. I guess I put myself in a difficult position because I even propose such subjects. I cannot give you a straight answer, but I think this is a reality. The man who could give you a straight answer about these things is this murderer from New Zealand, because he had it all figured out. He figured out that Islam, for instance, is an ideology that he understands, that you can take Quran, read Quran and you understand Islam. I don't think that this is possible because I know Muslims. I met Muslims. I mean, I met not as having social calls, but living in interaction, in constant contact. And you know that there are differences that are profound. You are not at all sure how those differences came about, but you know that they are there. And I think this is the difference between somebody who is living in real history and someone who is living in virtual history. And those people, young people who are basing everything out of internet, and internet is just a tool that expresses a mindset, that is the young people who are enmeshed in this postmodernity, in this solution of humanity. They are making images, they are making artificial construction of history, because this artificial construction, artificial explanations are perfect. You have systems of explanations. I remember listening to those alt-right people. They have answer to everything. They have this construct of a white race, history of what white race should do, of difference between races, and then when they try to apply these principles to real history, for instance to the history of my part of the world, then you see that they have no touch with anything. They have no touch with reality, because in reality nothing is so straightforward. It's abundant with meaning and with different layers of traditions, of things that happened in the past that caused our world to be like it is now, and we cannot understand them because we forgot them, because we know, I'd say, very little. So I know this is very convoluted narration, but at this point I can't be more clearer than that.